Hi, welcome back to my story time with Nana. I have a whole new story for you. I hope you really like this one. It's another grandma tale. I'm so excited. Let's begin. Grandma Tales. Mrs. Fedorchak. Word was getting around at the Gray Manor that Penelope was selling flowers for stories. When she and Mommy arrived that morning, there were several of the resident women waiting in the common room, waiting for Penelope. Good morning, Mrs. Jennings said. Looks like you have several grandmas waiting to tell a story for a flower. Oh my, Penelope replied. I usually only have time for one story. Who should I pick? Well, Mrs. Fedorchak has been here the longest. How about a story from her? She answered. She's sitting over there in the corner in that rocking chair. Penelope walked over. Hello, Mrs. Fedorchak. My name is Penelope. Oh, I know. Are you here to sell a flower? I am. How did you know? Your reputation precedes you, the woman said. I am very interested in buying a flower from you. Pull up a chair. Penelope slid a chair over next to Mrs. Fedorchak. Do you have a story to tell? I do. I heard you are particularly interested in stories about when we were close to your age. I am. Do you have a story about when you were 8? I do. When I was a girl, a little bit younger than you, I lived in Irvington, New Jersey on Union Avenue in a new apartment complex with my mother, father, my sisters, Honey and Claire, and my brother Sonny. Now, this was around the time of the Great Depression. A lot of people were poorly off. They didn't have money or jobs, and some couldn't afford to feed their families. It was hard times for a lot of people. Now, I'm not sure what my father did for a living. We never talked about such things. Whatever he did kept food on the table and clothes on our backs. Our apartment was nicely furnished. We had beautiful rugs and draperies. My mother always wore the prettiest dresses and had the nicest jewelry. My sisters and I always had new dresses for every holiday. My father even gave me and my siblings a quarter a week for allowance. Now, I know that doesn't seem like much to you, 25 cents. But back then, that was a lot of money, about the same as $4 or $5. Sometimes I would take my quarter down to the grocery store and I would buy myself some chocolate and put the rest of the money away in my piggy bank. I know I was supposed to save my allowance, but I sure did have a sweet tooth, and I just couldn't resist chocolate. I still do have a sweet tooth. Mrs. Fedorchak pulled a miniature chocolate bar from her pocket and handed it to Penelope. Go ahead, she said. It's delicious. Penelope opened the wrapper and took a small bite, and it was delicious. Anyway, I suppose you would say we were well off. Like I said, it wasn't something that we spoke about. It just was. I was saving most of my allowance for a new doll. I had seen her in one of the shops downtown and I just had to have her. But my story really begins about a year before my first Holy Communion. My family would go to Sunday Mass and then I would go to catechism afterwards. That's just a fancy name for Sunday school to learn about God, Jesus, and the ways of our Lord. I was extremely excited about making my first Holy Communion. Not only would I be closer to God, closer to Jesus, my mother would buy me a beautiful new dress and a veil. It was a very important day for me and my family. So, one morning, after getting my allowance, I walked to the grocer to get a piece of chocolate. And while I was in the store, I overheard a woman that lived in our apartment building telling her little boy that they could not afford any penny candy. We can only get potatoes today, she told him. Potatoes were cheap. Now, I knew that this meant that they were poor. I don't know how I knew that. I just did. I felt sad. I mean, really, really sad. So I paid for my chocolate. I handed it to the little boy and I ran from the store. And I remember his mother calling after me, little girl, as I ran up the street. And that night at dinner, I asked my father if we were rich. He told me that we were fortunate. I didn't really understand, but I didn't press it any further. And really, at that time, I was too young to understand. What I did know was that we were not poor. The next day, I took a quarter from my piggy bank and went to that family's apartment and I slid it under their door. It felt good. I mean, I felt good, really good. The next time my father gave me my allowance, I went to another apartment and I slid my quarter under their door. Now, I knew my father would want me to be saving my money, but it just felt so good knowing that I was helping another family. Over the course of several months, I would watch people in the grocery store to see who was only buying potatoes, and they would be my next family that I would help. I stopped buying chocolate for myself altogether. I mean, I wanted it, but it felt so much better to give. I started going to the grocery store and buying some food with my allowance, and then dropping the food off at the front door of a family in need. I don't know how to explain how helping someone else made me feel. And then a terrible, terrible thing happened. My father passed away unexpectedly. Oh, it was so sad. We were all so sad. What were we going to do? Shortly after father passed away, mother started selling things in our apartment, our rugs, most of our furnishings, her dresses, and even some of her jewelry. And then one day, mother came home from the grocery store and she only had potatoes. You see, my father was the one who made the money for our family, and with him gone, we had to change the way we lived. We were poor. About a month before my first Holy Communion, my mother asked us to bring our piggy banks to the living room. She explained that since our father was no longer there to support the family, we were going to have to share our resources. I was in a panic because I had used nearly all of my savings buying food for other families. When mother had emptied the piggy bank, she noticed right away that mine was considerably less than my brothers and sisters. She asked me where all of my allowance had gone, and I just started crying. I was so ashamed that we needed that money and I had just given it away. I was certain that my mother would be angry. Instead, she pulled me into her arms and hugged me tight. I was confused. I had spent almost all of my savings and she wasn't angry. She just asked me, where had all my money gone? I explained how I had seen other families struggling and so had given my allowance to them. And I remember my mother hugging me even tighter. She kissed my forehead and told me everything would be okay and not to worry. She wiped away my tears and told me that even though we could use the money, she was proud of me for sharing. Mother started working. She cleaned apartments and took in ironing and sewing, anything to make money. My brother quit school and started selling newspapers on the street. There were no longer any luxuries for us. We were just trying to get by with what we had. Mother sold the rest of her fine dresses and jewelry. They were very hard times for us, but we did what we had to do to make it. My first Holy Communion was right around the corner, and I knew I would not have a new dress, shoes, or a veil. I was so sad about it, but I tried to be strong for my mother. I didn't want to make her sad too. And really, it wasn't about the dress. It was about the holiness of the day. The day came. and I pulled out the best dress I had. It was pale blue with little white flowers. It was my favorite dress, but I had really wanted a new dress. I knew I was being selfish, but I couldn't help how I was feeling. I was just a little girl after all. My mother came into my room to help me dress for this most special day. I think this will be better suited for today, my mother said, handing me a white dress. I hugged my mother tight. She had made me a dress from her wedding dress, and it was beautiful. She explained that she could not afford a veil, but she had a hanky that would look very nice pinned to my hair. My mother polished an old pair of shoes, and although I had imagined my first Holy Communion differently, I felt beautiful and I couldn't wait to receive my Lord. As my mother, my brother, and sisters and I prepared to leave for church, there was a knock at the door. When Stanley opened the door, there was no one there, just a small box. He handed me the box. "It's addressed to you, Stella," he said. There was a card attached. I opened the card and I began to cry and cry. My mother took the card and read it aloud. "We know today is a special day for you. Thank you for helping us when we needed it the most. May you be blessed today and all the days of your life." Mother told me to open the box, and when I did, oh, I cried even harder. Inside was the most beautiful veil I had ever seen. "Oh, Stella dear, dry your tears," my mother said gently. "We need to get you to the church soon. Let me help you with your new veil." Mother dried my tears and replaced her hanky with the beautiful veil. You know, my sisters both wore that gown, that dress, and veil on their first Holy Communions. My mother embroidered our names into the hem. My sisters and I used that same dress for our daughters and our granddaughters, and their names are embroidered in the hem as well. Anyhow, I guess my story is about giving and caring for others, and I suppose that's why I became a nurse. Thank you so much for listening to my story, Penelope. It's just like it happened yesterday. "Oh, Mrs. Fedorchak, that was a wonderful story," Penelope said. "I think I would like to be a nurse like you and my mother." "It's a wonderful profession," she said. "What color flower would you like?" Penelope asked, holding out her paper flowers. "I think I'll choose the blue one," she answered. My mother had the most beautiful blue eyes, and every time I look at this flower, it will remind me of the day my mother handed me the dress she made for me that day and the happiness in her eyes. "Thank you again, Mrs. Fedorchak," she said, giving her a quick kiss. "I have to go find my mother. It's almost lunchtime." "Thank you again, Penelope, for listening to my story." "Oh, no, thank you for sharing your story with me." "Mommy, Mommy!" Penelope cried out. Her mother was in the laundry folding towels. "Hey, Penelope, did you hear a good story today?" "I did, and I've made a big decision." "And what is that, sweetie?" "I'm going to be a nurse when I grow up," she proclaimed. "And I want to be just like you, Mommy." She hugged her mother tight. You know, being kind and caring for others is so important. The end. Wow. I hope you enjoyed tonight's story. I enjoyed writing it and reading it. You know, all of these stories are true. Thank you so much for stopping in tonight. Don't forget to share my stories. See you next week. Mwah.